In the heart of the Balkan Peninsula, where mist lingers over ancient mountains and rivers carve their way to the Black Sea, lies a land of crossroads. For centuries, Bulgaria has been the meeting point of empires, armies, and faiths. Here, horsemen thundered across rolling plains, their hooves shaking the earth like drums of destiny. Here, stone fortresses stood as guardians of valleys, resisting the tides of invaders that swept in from east and west. As night falls, imagine yourself drifting through time, where the songs of shepherds blend with the echoes of marching armies. The Bulgarians were not merely farmers and builders, they were warriors. Their cavalry was feared from Constantinople to the Carpathians. Their kings, like Krum the Terrible and Simeon the Great, challenged mighty Byzantium, carving victories that still echo in memory. But this is not only a tale of battles. It is a story of resilience, of faith carried through centuries, of language and culture surviving the longest of nights under foreign rule, from the First Bulgarian Empire to the Second. From the golden domes of medieval churches to the silent courage under Ottoman chains. Bulgaria's story is both tender and fierce. Tonight, let us journey together across 12 centuries. Let us see how villages grew into kingdoms, how horsemen became legends, and how a people carved their identity between East and West. Drift with me as we walk through the rise and fall of Bulgaria, where every fortress stone, every sword, and every hymn tells us this land endures. On a quiet steppe, far beyond the forests of Eastern Europe, the grass stretches endlessly like a sea of green. The horizon seems eternal, and the wind carries the scent of horses, leather, and smoke from distant camps. Here, under the boundless sky, the ancestors of the Bulgarians first took shape. They were known as the Bulgars' nomadic horsemen, who belonged to the great tapestry of tribes that moved between the Black Sea and the Volga River. These early Bulgars lived in tents of felt, carried on wagons that rolled from pasture to pasture. Their lives were tied to the rhythm of the steppe spring migrations to fresh grazing lands, summers of raiding and trading, winters of survival under the icy breath of the north. Children learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Horses were not only companions but lifelines carrying warriors into battle, pulling carts, and serving as the wealth that measured a family's honor. The world of the steppe was not peaceful. Tribes rose and fell like waves upon the sea. To survive, the Bulgars sharpened themselves into warriors. Their bows were short and powerful, able to release arrows even while riding at full speed. Their sabers curved like the crescent moon, flashing in sudden ambushes. Unlike the foot soldiers of sedentary peoples, the Bulgars moved with the wind, striking quickly and vanishing into the grasslands. It was this mastery of cavalry that made them feared. The Byzantines, who ruled Constantinople and the lands of the Eastern Roman Empire, recorded with unease how the Bulgars could sweep across borders in a single night, raiding villages and vanishing before dawn. To face them was to face thunder on horseback. But the Bulgars were not only raiders. Like many steppe tribes, they were also bridge builders, linking east and west through trade and alliances. They encountered Persians, Huns, Avars, and Slavs. With each meeting, their culture absorbed new colors, words, rituals, even gods. The Bulgars began to move westward, drawn by richer pastures and the promise of permanent lands. Their migration was not without blood. In the 7th century, under leaders like Khan Asparuh, the Bulgars crossed the Danube River and clashed with Byzantium itself. The Byzantine Empire, accustomed to fighting Persians and Arabs, suddenly faced a new enemy from the north. The chronicles tell us that in 680 AD, at the Battle of Ongal, the Bulgars defeated the imperial forces. It was not only a military triumph, it was the birth of a nation. From this victory, the First Bulgarian Empire rose. Nestled between the Danube and the Balkan Mountains, it was a land defended by both nature and men. The forests and ridges formed barriers, while Bulgar cavalry patrolled the plains. The empire that began here would last for centuries, shaping the destiny of southeastern Europe. Yet even in their new homeland, the steppe spirit never left them. Their rulers carried titles of Khans. Their armies remained dominated by horsemen, and their culture still remembered the endless horizon. Over time, they mingled with the Slavic peoples already living in the Balkans. Out of this fusion, a new identity began to form, not only Bulgar, not only Slav, but something greater Bulgarian. For the people of the Balkans, the arrival of the Bulgars was both fear and fascination. To farmers, their horsemen seemed like storms descending from the sky. To rulers, they were rivals who could not be ignored. To the land itself, they were new guardians, those who would build fortresses, dig churches into the earth, and inscribe their names in stone. And so, from the windswept steppes, a story began. The Bulgars were no longer wanderers without a home. They had carved out a kingdom by the sword and the horse. The echoes of hooves that once shook the grasslands now thundered across the Balkans. This was the first chapter of their destiny, a chapter written in motion, in battle, and in the dreams of riders who sought more than survival. They sought a homeland, and in the shadow of the Balkan mountains, they had found it. When the Bulgars crossed the Danube and secured victory at Ongal in 680 AD, they were no longer wanderers. They had laid the foundation of a kingdom, the land between the river and the Balkan mountains, rich in forests, rivers, and fertile valleys, now belonged to them. But possession of land was never permanent in the medieval world. It had to be defended, shaped, and claimed through struggle. And so began the forging of the First Bulgarian Empire. Khan Asparuh, the founding ruler, was not simply a horseman, but a statesman. He saw that the Bulgars, though fierce in battle, were too few to hold such a vast territory alone. Around them lived Slavic tribes, already settled, farming, and worshipping their own gods. Instead of ruling as overlords only by the sword, Asparuh forged alliances, binding the Bulgars and Slavs into one people. It was a union of the steppe and the plough, of cavalry and village, of nomad and settler. From this fusion came strength. The Byzantines, however, did not accept this new kingdom lightly. Constantinople had long seen itself as the center of the civilized world, heir to Rome, and master of the Balkans. For them, the Bulgars were barbarians, intruders who threatened imperial order. Wars soon followed. The Byzantines sent armies northward, their banners glittering, their generals confident. Yet the Bulgars, hardened by the steppe, knew how to fight on this land. They built earthworks and wooden palisades, turning rivers and swamps into traps. Their cavalry struck from hidden passes, scattering imperial formations, again and again. Byzantine soldiers fell beneath the hooves of Bulgar horses. The chronicles record that in 681, the empire was forced to acknowledge the Bulgars, signing a treaty that recognized their state. This was no small achievement. The Byzantine Empire, proud and unyielding, rarely bent to newcomers. But the Bulgars had forced them to, not with diplomacy alone, but with the sharp edge of the saber. From this foundation, the First Bulgarian Empire grew. Fortresses rose on the frontiers, built of stone and timber. Towns began to cluster along trade routes, where Slavic farmers and Bulgar warriors mingled in markets. A new capital was founded at Pliska, a city unlike Constantinople with its marble and domes, but strong, functional, and guarded by walls that spoke of power. Life inside the empire was a blend of traditions. Slavs brought their farming cycles, their folk songs, and their deep connection to the land. Bulgars contributed their warrior spirit, their horse culture, and their system of leadership through khans. Over time, these elements intertwined into a uniquely Bulgarian identity, fierce, resilient, and proud. Yet, the greatest tests lay ahead. The empire's neighbors were powerful and restless. To the south, Byzantium remained both rival and occasional ally, watching for weakness. To the west, Avars and later Franks stirred. To the east, the steppe still echoed with the movements of other nomads. The Bulgarians would have to hold their ground with vigilance. It was in this crucible of conflict that their military system hardened. The Bulgar cavalry remained the heart of their power, swift and decisive. But now they also learned to fortify, to build stone defenses, and to fight in sieges. They adapted, turning from pure nomad raiders into rulers capable of defending a kingdom. One story tells of Khan Tervel, Asparuh's successor, who played a decisive role in 717 AD during the Arab siege of Constantinople. The Umayyad Caliphate had brought an army said to number in the tens of thousands, threatening to extinguish Byzantium itself. The emperor called upon the Bulgarians for aid. Tervel answered, leading his cavalry south. In a ferocious clash, the Bulgars cut down thousands of Arab soldiers, helping to lift the siege and saving Constantinople. In gratitude, Tervel was granted the title Caesar, a rare honor for a foreign ruler. This moment revealed the paradox of Bulgaria's position. At times enemy, at times savior. The empire stood at the hinge of east and west, neither fully steppe nor fully settled, neither entirely Slavic nor entirely Bulgar. It was a bridge, one forged in the fires of war and tempered by survival. As the centuries unfolded, the First Bulgarian Empire would rise to glory under rulers like Khan Krum and Simeon the Great. But even in these early days, the foundations were laid: courage in battle, resilience in hardship, and a will to endure. The forests whispered of villages growing. The plains trembled under the hooves of riders. The mountains stood guard as silent witnesses. Out of this land, the Bulgarians had carved a place in history. And so, as night deepens, we leave behind the first steps of their empire. Ahead lie triumphs and tragedies, kings and conquerors, hymns and laments. But the flame that Asparuh lit on the steppe, carried across the Danube, now burned brightly in the Balkans. It would not be easily extinguished. The forests of the Balkans are deep and silent, but in the early 9th century, their silence was broken by the sound of marching armies out of the plains. The Bulgars had grown into a formidable power, and at their head stood one of the most fearsome rulers of medieval Europe, Khan Krum. To his enemies, he was known as the Terrible. To his people, he was a lawgiver, a unifier, and a warrior who carved Bulgaria's name into history. Krum rose to power in 803, inheriting a kingdom that had survived its first century but still stood in the shadow of Byzantium. He understood that Bulgaria's survival depended on more than raids or chance victories. It needed strong foundations, law, discipline, and a vision that would bind its people together. And so Krum began to shape not just an army, but a nation. One of his earliest achievements was the codification of laws. In an age when most rulers governed by whim and decree, Krum issued laws to curb crime, protect property, and strengthen social order. These laws punished thieves, encouraged agriculture, and created a sense of justice. The Khan was not only a warrior, but also a legislator, someone who sought to give his people structure as well as strength. But it was on the battlefield that Krum's name was forged. In 811, the Byzantine Emperor Nikephoros I launched a massive campaign against Bulgaria, determined to crush his northern rival once and for all. Imperial banners marched into Bulgarian lands, and Constantinople waited for news of victory. Instead, disaster struck. Krum, with an army of horsemen and fortified positions in the mountain passes, trapped the Byzantine forces in the Varbitsa Pass. There, the Bulgarians ambushed the imperial army, cutting down tens of thousands. Emperor Nikephoros himself was slain, an event that sent shockwaves through the Byzantine world. For the first time in centuries, a Byzantine emperor had fallen in battle against a barbarian foe. Legend says that Krum ordered Nikephoros' skull to be cleaned and lined with silver, using it as a drinking cup. To modern ears, the tale sounds grim, but in the medieval world, it symbolized triumph, dominance, and the humiliation of an enemy who had once been invincible. For the Bulgarians, it was proof that their Khan could match and defeat the might of Rome's heirs. In the years that followed, Krum continued to press Byzantium. His armies besieged Adrianople, raided deep into Thrace, and even threatened Constantinople itself. Chroniclers describe the Bulgars appearing before the Theodosian walls, their cavalry glittering in the sun, their horns sounding across the plains. Though the city held, the message was clear: Bulgaria was no longer a frontier kingdom. It was a great power. Yet Krum was more than a terror to his enemies. Within his realm, he sought stability. His laws strengthened the bond between Bulgars and Slavs, uniting them as one nation under a single ruler. His victories filled the people with pride, while his reforms gave them security. Under Krum, Bulgaria transformed from a loose confederation into a centralized, disciplined state. The Byzantines called him the new Sennacherib, likening him to the ancient Assyrian king who had once terrorized the Near East. To them, Krum was a nightmare, unpredictable and unstoppable. But to Bulgaria, he was the architect of empire. Krum died in 814, just as he was preparing a grand assault on Constantinople. His death spared the Byzantine capital from what might have been its greatest trial. Yet his legacy endured. He had proven that Bulgaria could not only resist Byzantium but also defeat it on the field of battle. His laws, victories, and vision paved the way for future rulers, who would carry the empire to even greater heights. As the candlelight flickers tonight, imagine the hooves echoing in the mountain passes, the clash of iron in the forests, the banners of Bulgaria snapping in the wind. This was the age of Khan Krum, when Bulgaria was feared across the Balkans, when even emperors trembled at its power. And, as dawn rose after his death, the Bulgarians were no longer outsiders. They were a nation of destiny, poised to rise into a golden age under Simeon the Great. The dawn of the 10th century brought with it the most brilliant chapter in Bulgarian history. At its center stood a man of vision, intellect, and power, Tsar Simeon I, remembered as the Great. Under his reign, Bulgaria reached a height of influence that few could have imagined when the first horseman crossed the Danube centuries earlier. His empire stretched from the Black Sea to the Adriatic, from the Carpathians to the gates of Constantinople. This was the golden age of Bulgaria. Simeon was not born merely as a warrior, he was raised as a scholar. As a young man, he studied in Constantinople, the shining jewel of Byzantium. There he absorbed Greek philosophy, theology, and the subtleties of diplomacy. Yet as he walked the marble streets of the empire that looked down upon his people, he carried with him a burning ambition to see Bulgaria not as a vassal or a frontier kingdom, but as the equal of Rome and Byzantium. When Simeon became ruler in 893, his ambitions quickly took shape. He transformed the Bulgarian state into a powerful monarchy, declaring himself Tsar Caesar, a title that placed him on equal footing with the emperors of Constantinople. This was more than a word, it was a statement that Bulgaria had become an empire in its own right. The Byzantines, however, did not accept this easily. War erupted, and Simeon proved himself not only as a thinker, but as a commander of genius. At the Battle of Anchialis in 917, his army faced the might of Byzantium in one of the largest clashes of the medieval Balkans. Tens of thousands of soldiers lined the plains, their banners whipping in the sea breeze. Simeon, astride his horse, directed the battle with precision. The Bulgarian cavalry struck like a thunderbolt, breaking through Byzantine lines. The rout was devastating. Chroniclers claim that the fields were littered with the fallen, and the river ran red. For Byzantium, it was a catastrophe. For Bulgaria, it was a triumph that confirmed their supremacy in the Balkans. But Simeon's greatness did not rest on war alone. Within his empire, he nurtured a flourishing of culture that historians still call the Golden Age. Bulgarian monasteries became centers of learning, where scribes copied and translated works of theology, philosophy, and science. Literature blossomed in Old Church Slavonic, the first Slavic literary language, spreading faith and knowledge across Eastern Europe. The Cyrillic alphabet, developed by disciples of saints Cyril and Methodius, took root in Bulgaria and became one of the most enduring gifts of this era. Simeon himself was deeply involved in this cultural flowering. He envisioned his capital in Preslav as a rival to Constantinople. Marble palaces, golden domed churches, and intricate mosaics adorned the city. It was said that visitors, stepping into the royal court, felt they had entered a second Rome. Yet Simeon never abandoned the sword. Time and again, he marched his armies south, pressing Byzantium to its limits. His dream was nothing less than to sit upon the throne of Constantinople itself. The Theodosian walls denied him that prize, but his pressure forced Byzantium into constant defense. Even the Pope in Rome recognized Simeon's power, corresponding with him as an equal sovereign. The empire Simeon built was vast and formidable, but it was also fragile. Its strength rested on his leadership, his victories, and the unity he commanded. Beyond his reign, the forces of rivalry, invasion, and internal strife would test the foundations he had laid. But while he lived, Bulgaria stood at its zenith, a beacon of both might and wisdom. As night deepens, imagine Preslav's golden domes glinting under the moonlight, the chants of monks rising like soft waves, and the distant sound of cavalry hooves echoing against the mountains. This was Simeon's Bulgaria, a land where the sword and the book, the rider and the scholar, stood together. Simeon the Great gave his people not only victories, but an identity, a pride that would endure long after his empire began to wane. His dream of matching Byzantium may never have been fully realized, but he carved for Bulgaria a golden chapter, one that still shines in memory. The death of Simeon the Great in 927 marked the end of an age of triumph. Bulgaria, under his hand, had reached its golden peak. Mighty armies, glittering capitals, and a cultural bloom that rivaled Byzantium itself. Yet history is rarely merciful. The same forces that had carried Bulgaria upward now began to test its strength. And the longest struggle of all was the one it could never escape: its rivalry with the Byzantine Empire. At first, there was a moment of respite. Simeon's son, Peter I, inherited a vast empire, but faced the heavy weight of expectation. Unlike his father, Peter was not driven by dreams of conquest. Instead, he sought peace. In 927, he signed a treaty with Byzantium, a rare recognition of Bulgaria as an equal empire. For the first time, the Patriarch of Constantinople acknowledged the independence of the Bulgarian Church. It was a diplomatic victory, one that gave Peter the title Tsar in the eyes of Christendom. But peace came at a cost. To many nobles and warriors, the empire that Simeon had carved with the sword now seemed to soften. The energy of conquest dulled into the routines of diplomacy. Byzantium, though temporarily subdued, waited like a coiled serpent, and new threats began to emerge. From the north, the Magyars swept into the Carpathian Basin, raiding deep into Bulgarian lands. From the east, the Pechenegs, another steppe people, crossed the Danube, their horsemen burning villages and carrying off captives. Bulgaria, once the terror of the Balkans, found itself besieged on multiple fronts. Peter I tried to strengthen the state through the church. He encouraged monasticism, and during his reign, the spiritual movement that would later produce figures like Sant. Ivan of Rila flourished. Yet while monasteries prayed, Soldiers bled. The empire's armies, though still formidable, were stretched thin. Fortresses along the Danube, once proud bulwarks, struggled to hold against wave after wave of raids. Byzantium, under emperors like Nikephoros, Phocas, and John Tzimiskes, began to recover its power. Their armies were reorganized, their generals hardened by campaigns against Arabs in the east. When they turned their gaze back to the Balkans, the tide of history began to shift. In 971, John Tzimiskes launched a campaign that struck deep into Bulgarian lands. The Byzantine armies, disciplined and relentless, captured the Bulgarian capital, Preslav. For the first time in generations, the empire's heart had been pierced. Though Bulgaria survived, the blow was grievous. The Byzantines installed their own influence, seeking to break the strength of their northern rival. Yet the Bulgarians did not vanish. In the western parts of the empire, resistance continued. The people of Macedonia and the mountains rallied under local leaders, keeping alive the spark of independence. Among them would later rise the most famous of all, Samuel, who would carry Bulgaria into one last great struggle. But in these years after Simeon, the pattern of decline became clear. The once unstoppable cavalry found itself checked by new tactics and better equipped Byzantine forces. The great fortresses, though still standing, could not defend every valley and river. And inside, the unity forged by Krum and Simeon began to crack. Nobles sought their own power, peasants groaned under taxes, and the church, though holy, could not shield the realm from swords. Still, to the ordinary Bulgarian, life went on. Fields were ploughed, markets bustled, churches filled with chants. Villagers looked to their kings and prayed for protection. They remembered the victories of old, when their riders had shattered emperors, and hoped that one day such strength would return. History, however, was moving with a different current. Byzantium grew stronger, its armies more confident, its diplomacy sharper. The Bulgarians, once the hammer striking the empire, now began to feel the weight of being the anvil. Yet this was not the end. The story of Bulgaria was not only one of decline, but of resilience. Even as the First Empire staggered, new leaders, new battles, and new hopes would rise. The long struggle with Byzantium had begun to turn. But the Bulgarians were not ready to surrender their place in the Balkans. As night settles, picture the lonely watchtowers on the Danube, their fires burning against the dark. Imagine riders galloping through mountain passes, carrying news of raids, victories, and defeats. This was a time of testing, when Bulgaria learned that glory must be defended not once, but forever. And in the shadows of these struggles, the figure of Samuel began to emerge, the warrior king who would lead his people into their last great stand against Byzantium. In the rugged mountains of Macedonia, where stone ridges cut against the sky and valleys hide villages like jewels, a new leader rose to carry Bulgaria's banner. His name was Samuel, and to his people, he became more than a king. He was their shield against destruction, their warrior in an age of peril. By the late 10th century, Bulgaria was fractured. The Byzantines had taken Preslav and much of the east, leaving only the western lands free. But in those mountains, resistance burned bright. Samuel, son of a noble family, proved himself a commander of rare courage. In 997, he took the title of Tsar, and the fragments of empire rallied around him. Samuel's Bulgaria was not the vast realm of Simeon the Great, but it was fierce. From his stronghold at Ohrid, he ruled over Macedonia, parts of Serbia, and the rugged west. His armies were made of hardened men who knew the terrain, the rivers, the forests, the hidden passes, against Byzantium's legions. Samuel's warriors fought with ambushes, raids, and sudden strikes. They were mountain lions against imperial eagles. At first, Samuel tasted victory. In 986, he ambushed the Byzantine Emperor Basil II in the narrow passes near Trajan's Gate. The imperial army, overconfident, was shattered. Basil barely escaped with his life. For Samuel, it was a triumph that echoed the glories of Krum and Simeon. For a moment, it seemed the Bulgarians might yet rise again. But Basil II was no ordinary foe. Known to history as the Bulgar Slayer, he was relentless, disciplined, and patient, year after year. He launched campaigns into Bulgarian lands, burning villages, capturing fortresses, and wearing down resistance. Samuel fought back with equal determination. His cavalry struck supply lines. His soldiers defended mountain passes. His spies watched the movements of imperial armies. The struggle lasted decades. Each summer brought new battles. Each winter brought weary survivors back to rebuild. The land itself bore scars, fields trampled, towns emptied, rivers running with the remnants of war. Yet Samuel never yielded. His court at Ohrid became a symbol of defiance. His presence a reminder that Bulgaria still lived. The final act came in 1014. In the valley near the village of Clydion, Basil marched with a massive army, determined to crush Samuel once and for all. The Bulgarians fortified the mountain passes with palisades and ditches, hoping to block the imperial advance. For weeks, they resisted, the clash of swords echoing through the hills. But Basil found a way around, sending forces through a hidden path to strike the Bulgarians from behind, trapped between two forces. Samuel's army was annihilated. Some 14,000 Bulgarians were captured. What happened next burned itself into the memory of nations. Basil ordered them blinded save for one man in every 100, left with a single eye to lead the rest home. When the blinded soldiers stumbled back to Samuel, rows upon rows of men groping in darkness. The sight was too much for the old Tsar. He collapsed from shock and grief. Within months, he was dead. Bulgaria's last great defender had fallen. His heart broken, not in battle, but in the agony of his people. The First Bulgarian Empire, weakened and leaderless, could not endure. By 1018, Byzantium absorbed its lands. For nearly 2 centuries, Bulgaria disappeared as an independent power, its people living under imperial rule. Yet the memory of Samuel did not fade. To the Byzantines, Basil II was victorious. But his epithet, Bulgar Slayer, was also testimony to the ferocity of those he fought. To the Bulgarians, Samuel became a tragic hero, a king who fought to the very end, who stood unbroken until grief itself struck him down. As the candlelight flickers tonight, imagine the mountain passes where men once fought with desperate courage, the long columns of blinded prisoners walking in silence, and the lonely throne of Ohrid, empty at last. This was the twilight of the First Bulgarian Empire, a chapter written in both glory and sorrow. But history is not a single fall. From the ashes of defeat, the Bulgarians would one day rise again, building a second empire and reclaiming their place among nations. The spirit of Samuel, unyielding, proud, and enduring, remained alive in their hearts. For nearly 2 centuries after the fall of Samuel, the Bulgarian lands lay under Byzantine rule. The proud empire that had once shaken Constantinople was reduced to provinces, its Tsars replaced by imperial governors, its fortresses flying the double-headed eagle of Byzantium. Yet, beneath the weight of conquest, the Bulgarian spirit endured. Villagers still spoke their language, priests still chanted in Slavonic, and in the hearts of the people, memories of kings and victories smoldered like embers waiting to ignite. By the late 12th century, Byzantium itself had grown weak. Corruption gnawed at its court, and foreign invasions strained its armies. Taxes on the Balkan provinces grew heavier, pressing peasants and nobles alike into discontent. In the rugged mountains near Tarnovo, 2 brothers, Asen and Peter, emerged as leaders of resistance. They were not emperors born, but men of ambition and vision, determined to restore Bulgaria's independence. In 1185, after being denied land rights and insulted by Byzantine officials, the brothers raised the banner of revolt. They called upon the people to remember the days of Simeon and Samuel, to rise against the foreign rulers. Their cause was blessed by the church, as priests proclaimed that God himself willed Bulgaria's restoration. Soon, villages, towns, and fortresses across the north rallied to their side. The rebellion was no mere riot. It became a war. Asen and Peter gathered armies of peasants, warriors, and local nobles. They struck Byzantine garrisons, captured strongholds, and melted back into the mountains when imperial forces advanced. Their knowledge of the land gave them an edge. Byzantium, stretched thin by wars elsewhere, could not suppress the rising. By 1187, the brothers had established control over much of northern Bulgaria. At Tarnovo, a new capital was declared, perched high on hills and guarded by strong walls. The Second Bulgarian Empire was born. For the first time in 2 centuries, Bulgaria once again had its own rulers, its own army, and its own destiny. The Byzantines tried to reclaim control, sending armies northward, but victory slipped through their fingers. The Asen brothers proved shrewd commanders. They forged alliances with other powers, including the Vlachs and Cumans, steppe warriors whose cavalry bolstered Bulgarian ranks. Against this coalition, Byzantium struggled. The empire that had once crushed Samuel's heirs now found itself on the defensive, but rebellion is rarely without sacrifice. In 1196, Asen was assassinated, struck down by rivals. The burden of leadership fell to Peter, who continued the struggle until his own death. Yet their cause did not collapse. Another brother, Kaloyan, rose to carry their legacy forward. proving that the Second Empire was no fleeting spark, but a fire that would burn for generations. The rebirth of Bulgaria was more than political. It was a renewal of identity. In Tarnovo, churches rose, their frescoes glowing with holy images. Markets bustled with merchants carrying goods from the Danube to the Aegean. Farmers tilled their fields no longer as subjects of Byzantium, but as citizens of a revived empire. The dream of independence had become reality. To the villagers who gathered around campfires, the names Asen and Peter became legends. They were not kings crowned in marble halls, but warriors who dared to challenge an empire. Their rebellion was a reminder that even after centuries of subjugation, a nation could rise again. As night falls, imagine the bells of Tarnovo ringing over the hills, the banners of the Asen dynasty fluttering against the wind, and the voices of peasants shouting in triumph as fortresses once lost returned to their hands. The Second Bulgarian Empire had been born in fire, defiance, and hope. Yet ahead lay new struggles. Wars with Byzantium would continue. Crusaders from the west would arrive, and powerful Tsars like Kaloyan and Ivan Asen II would carve Bulgaria's destiny further. But for now, the people rejoiced, for the chains of 2 centuries had been broken. The spirit of Simeon, of Samuel, and of countless riders past once again thundered across the Balkans. The dawn of the 13th century brought new storms to the Balkans. Byzantium, long the great rival of Bulgaria, was collapsing under the weight of both enemies and intrigue. In 1204, the unthinkable happened. Constantinople itself fell, not to Bulgarians or steppe horsemen, but to an army of Latin crusaders from the west. The knights of the Fourth Crusade, armored in steel and driven by greed, stormed the greatest city of Christendom and carved out a new empire upon its ruins, the Latin Empire of Constantinople. For Bulgaria, ruled by Tsar Kaloyan, this was both danger and opportunity. Kaloyan, younger brother of Asen and Peter, was determined to secure his empire's survival and recognition. He had already fought Byzantium with success, earning the title Roman Slayer in memory of Bulgaria's victories. But now, a new enemy stood at his southern border, Crusaders, confident in their heavy cavalry and eager to expand. At first, Kaloyan played the diplomat. He wrote to the Pope in Rome, seeking recognition as king and aligning Bulgaria with Western Christendom. The Pope, eager to extend influence, crowned Kaloyan in spirit, granting legitimacy. But diplomacy could not stop swords. The Latin knights, dismissive of the Bulgarians, soon marched north, claiming the right to dominate the Balkans. Kaloyan answered with steel. In 1205, near the city of Adrianople, the Latin Emperor Baldwin I led a proud host of knights and soldiers into Bulgarian territory. The Crusaders believed their heavy cavalry shining in chainmail, mounted on massive war horses, could crush any foe. They had broken the walls of Constantinople itself. How could the hills and horsemen of Bulgaria resist them? Kaloyan knew otherwise. He understood the power of terrain, ambush, and cunning. His allies, the Cuman horsemen from the steppe, rode with him. Swift and elusive, together, they set a trap. When the Crusaders charged, their lances lowered. The Bulgarians feigned retreat. Dust rose, hooves thundered, and the knights pursued, eager for glory. But as they galloped deeper into the plains, the ground turned soft, marshy, unsuited for their heavy horses. Suddenly, from all sides, Bulgarian and Cuman riders struck. Arrows rained, sabers slashed, and the knights, weighed down by armor, found themselves surrounded. The battle became a slaughter. Chroniclers say that thousands of Latins fell, their proud cavalry shattered by nimble horse archers and Bulgarian swords. Even the Emperor Baldwin was captured alive, dragged into Kaloyan's hands. He would never return to his empire. Legends tell that he died in a Bulgarian fortress, a prisoner of the Tsar. Adrianople was more than a victory, it was a statement. The Latins, who had conquered Constantinople, were humbled in the open field by a people they had underestimated. Kaloyan earned a fearsome reputation across Europe. To his enemies, he was called Kaloyan the Terrible. To his subjects, he was the protector who had defended Bulgaria against both East and West. Yet his reign was not only war. Kaloyan worked to strengthen Tarnovo as the capital, raising churches and fortifications. He sought to balance diplomacy with violence, keeping Rome close while asserting independence. His victory over the Crusaders secured Bulgaria's place as a great power once more, feared by both the Latin West and the remnants of Byzantium. But fate is fickle. In 1207, during a campaign against Thessalonica, Kaloyan was assassinated by his own Cuman allies. His sudden death robbed Bulgaria of its fiercest defender. The empire he left behind was still strong, but without his iron hand, the balance of power began to shift again. Still, the memory of Adrianople lived on. It became a symbol of Bulgaria's military genius, where cunning, terrain, and the swiftness of riders overcame the might of armored crusaders. It showed that no empire, however proud, was invincible. As night falls, picture the field outside Adrianople, broken lances scattered in the mud, banners trampled into the earth, and riders disappearing into the dusk. Victorious, hear the clash of East and West, and the voice of Kaloyan, a Tsar who dared to challenge empires and carved his name into history with both terror and triumph. The death of Kaloyan left Bulgaria shaken, yet the flame of independence burned on. Through years of turmoil, dynastic struggles, and shifting alliances, the Asen dynasty endured, and in the early 13th century, a new Tsar emerged, one who would guide Bulgaria to its greatest prosperity since Simeon the Great. His name was Ivan Asen II, and under his reign, the Second Bulgarian Empire reached its dazzling height. Ivan Asen II ascended the throne in 1218 after years of exile. When he returned, it was not only with claims of bloodline, but with a clear vision. He sought to restore the strength of the state, not merely through war, but through wise alliances, flourishing trade, and balanced rule. Yet, when battle came, he proved every bit as capable as his warrior ancestors. One of his most decisive moments came in 1230 at the Battle of Klokotnitsa. Theodore Komnenos of Epirus, a rising Greek power, had broken a peace treaty and marched against Bulgaria with a massive army. Even Asen II, though outnumbered, led his men with confidence. Before the battle, he ordered the peace treaty, the very one Theodore had violated, to be tied to his lance as a symbol of justice. When the clash came, Bulgarian forces fought with discipline and fury. The enemy was routed, Theodore captured, and Bulgaria's dominance in the Balkans secured. The victory was so complete that Ivan Asen II became master over vast territories, stretching from the Black Sea to the Adriatic. The empire once again rivaled Byzantium in both size and power. Yet, unlike many conquerors, Ivan Asen II tempered his triumphs with wisdom. He released many prisoners after Klokotnitsa, showing mercy that earned him respect. His reign was marked not by endless war but by stability. Trade routes through the Balkans flourished, connecting the Danube to the Aegean and Adriatic seas. Merchants from Venice, Dubrovnik, and beyond filled Bulgarian markets, bringing wealth and prosperity. Tarnovo, the capital, glittered as a true imperial city, perched on hills and encircled by stone walls. It became not only a fortress, but a center of culture and faith. Churches rose with splendid frescoes, monasteries thrived, and Bulgarian artisans carved wood, painted icons, and illuminated manuscripts that spread across Orthodox Europe. The Bulgarian Church, independent and strong, added spiritual weight to the Tsar's power. Ivan Asen II was also a skilled diplomat. He balanced between East and West, forging marriages and treaties that secured Bulgaria's place among kingdoms. Even the Pope in Rome and the Patriarch in Constantinople acknowledged his influence. For a time, it seemed as if Bulgaria had found the perfect balance, a sword strong enough to defend, and a crown wise enough to rule. But shadows lingered on the horizon. After Ivan Asen's death in 1241, the unity he had built began to fray. Ambitious nobles sought power. External enemies tested the borders. And within a decade, Mongol invasions swept through the Balkans, shaking every kingdom. The stability that had marked his reign proved fragile once his guiding hand was gone. Still, for the Bulgarian people, the memory of Ivan Asen II remained a golden chapter. He was not remembered as terrible or slayer, but as a just ruler, a Tsar who combined the strength of the warrior with the wisdom of the sage. His Bulgaria was rich, proud, and at peace, a rare harmony in the stormy medieval world. As night deepens, picture the bells of Tarnovo echoing across the valleys, caravans of merchants winding along mountain roads, and the victorious banners of Klokotnitsa fluttering in the wind. This was the high tide of the Second Bulgarian Empire, when Bulgaria stood tall among nations, feared by its enemies and admired by its allies. And though the tide would one day recede, leaving the empire to face decline and conquest, the reign of Ivan Asen II proved one thing: Bulgaria was not only a land of warriors, but also a land of builders, thinkers, and leaders who could create a legacy of both power and peace. After the brilliant reign of Ivan Asen II, the fortunes of Bulgaria began to change. His empire, strong and prosperous, soon faced storms that even a wise ruler could not have prevented. The 13th and 14th centuries were times of turbulence across Europe. Mongol raiders swept through the Balkans, leaving scars on every kingdom. Rivalries among nobles weakened the throne, while neighbors Serbia, Hungary, and the resurgent Byzantines pressed in from every side. The Second Bulgarian Empire, though still proud, began to fracture. Tsars after Ivan Asen lacked his strength. Some were children placed on the throne by ambitious boyars. Others were rulers consumed by feuds. Each internal division weakened the kingdom further. Tarnovo still shone as a cultural capital, but its walls could not hold back the shifting tides of history. In the mid-14th century, a new power rose from the east. The Ottomans, once a small principality in Anatolia. They expanded across the ruins of Byzantium, forging an empire of unmatched discipline and ambition. Their armies were unlike those Bulgaria had faced before: disciplined infantry, deadly archers, and a relentless will to conquer. At first, the Ottomans came as raiders, testing the defenses of the Balkans. Battles were fought, castles defended, villages burned. Bulgarian Tsars sought alliances sometimes with Byzantium, sometimes with Serbia, but unity was elusive. The great Balkan states, instead of standing together, quarreled while the Ottoman tide rolled steadily forward. The decisive moment came in 1396, at the Battle of Nicopolis. A coalition of European knights, joined by Balkan forces, confronted the Ottomans in what was meant to be a crusade to save the region. But pride and arrogance undid them. The heavy cavalry of France and Hungary charged recklessly, only to be trapped and destroyed by Ottoman discipline and strategy. Among the fallen hopes of Christendom, Bulgaria's fate was sealed. By the early 15th century, the Second Bulgarian Empire was no more. Tarnovo fell, its palaces and churches subdued beneath the crescent banner. Bulgarian lands were absorbed into the Ottoman Empire, and for nearly 5 centuries, the people lived under foreign rule. Yet, conquest did not erase identity. In villages tucked among the mountains, Bulgarian language and faith survived. Priests whispered the liturgy in Slavonic. Families told stories of Simeon, Samuel, Kaloyan, and Ivan Asen, keeping alive the memory of kings long gone. Folk songs carried the sorrow of loss, but also the stubborn pride of a nation that refused to vanish. Even under Ottoman chains, rebellions flared. Shepherds took up arms. Monks became leaders of resistance. And bandits in the forests styled themselves defenders of the people. Though crushed again and again, these uprisings kept alive the belief that freedom could one day return. The survival of Bulgaria was not only through resistance, but through endurance. The people tilled their fields, raised their children, and carried their traditions forward. The Cyrillic script, born in their medieval empire, continued to flourish, spreading across Slavic lands from Russia to Serbia. The Orthodox faith, defended through centuries, anchored their identity. And when at last, in the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire weakened, the Bulgarian nation rose again, reborn from centuries of darkness, reclaiming the independence that their ancestors had once won with sword and song. As the candle burns low tonight, imagine Tarnovo's walls standing silent under the moon, the echo of cavalry long gone, and the quiet voice of a people who endured. Bulgaria's empires rose and fell, yet the nation survived. From the horsemen of the steppe to the golden domes of Preslav and Tarnovo, from victories at Anchialus and Adrianople to the sorrows of Nicopolis. The story of Bulgaria is one of resilience. For though empires may fall, a people who remember their past can never truly be conquered. The story of Bulgaria is a story of endurance, from the wind-swept steppes where the first horsemen rode, to the shining domes of Preslav and Tarnovo, to the mountain villages that carried memory through centuries of foreign rule. The Bulgarians have lived through rise and fall, triumph and sorrow. We have seen Khans like Krum carve victories from the might of Byzantium. Tsars like Simeon the Great bring learning and splendor to the Balkans. Warriors like Samuel fight with unyielding courage. And rulers like Asen II guide their people to peace and prosperity. We have seen empires lost to time, but also a nation that refused to be forgotten. Even when fortresses crumbled and banners fell, the spirit of Bulgaria survived in songs, in prayers, in the language of its people. And in time, from the long night of Ottoman rule, that spirit rose again, carrying Bulgaria into the modern world. As you drift to sleep, let the echo of hooves fade into silence, carrying with them the memory of riders who once thundered across Europe. Their empires may be gone, but their story remains, reminding us that history is not only battles and crowns, but the endurance of a people through the ages. Thank you for joining this journey through 12 centuries of Bulgarian history. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of civilizations, their rise, their fall, and the lessons they leave behind.